BioShock 2 has quite a few interesting plasmids that you can play around with while you beat back the overwhelming forces of Sofia Lamb. Be it fire, electric, or something of the tornado variety, we get to toy around with quite a few superpowers in this iteration of the series, and it's one of the most enjoyable elements of any Rapture journey. Sure, most of what we got in the second game were just updates from powers in the first title, but since I didn't cover plasmids in that one, then I figured we'd take some time today honoring what I would consider the best of the best. Starting with... If you didn't play the Minerva's Den DLC for the second game in the series, then you'll be unfamiliar with this very unique plasmid that hails from it. Called Gravity Well, this power essentially creates a swirling vortex that pulls in nearby splicers and damages them with very satisfying results. It's one of the more unique abilities that you can acquire, and it's also the only plasmid that they added in the Minerva's Den DLC, seeing a good deal of emphasis in that expansion, as you'll have to use it from time to time on little mag-locked doors to get to certain areas. It's also very useful in keeping enemies at a distance for a while. They get sucked into this vortex, giving you time to heal, shoot back, or whatever you need. It even has upgrades like almost every other plasmid in the second game, with the second boost giving the vortex the ability to deal acid damage. It's amazing. However, sadly, since this is a DLC exclusive, that means you'll likely only get very little use out of this unique ability. Minerva's Den is only about 4 hours long, and you won't even acquire this plasmid until maybe an hour or more into your journey, leaving you with only 3 hours to really toy around with it. Still though, the time that you get to spend with Gravity Well is a very nice little boon to the DLC, and so it earns the 5th slot on this list. I wasn't sure if I should put this one on the list because it almost borders on not being a plasmid and just being a passive ability. Summon Eleanor, the last power that you'll acquire in the base game, being exactly what it's called: the ability to summon your newly big sisterified former charge. It's arguably the most powerful plasmid in the game, certainly the most beneficial in a fight, as Eleanor runs around absolutely slapping everything with an eye shot. Essentially, we get one of those big sister things that we've had to deal with all game, and get to turn her loose as she does all the heavy lifting, and we sit back seeing our baby girl all grown up. It not only plays well into the storyline, as we get to see Eleanor actually take some agency in her life, but it also gives us an in-the-flesh companion. If you've never noticed, the first 2 games have something of a philosophy of keeping the other characters at an arm's distance, especially the first game. When we interact with characters, 9 times out of 10, it's through radio contact. I don't know if that's because they didn't want to animate them, or maybe it's a game theory thing, but it's something that I always notice. So when we get to Eleanor as a follower, I see it as almost the first steps toward the NPC explosion that we get in Infinite. But still, even with all those interesting aspects to this plasmid, it still suffers from the same issue as Gravity Well. That being that we don't get it until very late in the game, and thus we spend very little time with Eleanor. It's also the only plasmid without upgrades, which I think you understand why, but it's still of note. So, for those reasons, Summon Eleanor lands at the 4th spot on this list. There are a couple of powers that I heavily associate with the first 2 BioShock games, and one of the ones at the top of that list is Telekinesis. Acquired very near the start of the game as a gift from Eleanor, Telekinesis is probably the most versatile ability that can be acquired, and is one of the most fun to toy around with.
That's myself. This can't be right.
Pick up exploding canisters, pick up dead bodies, pick up anything that's not bolted to the floor and use it as a weapon against the hordes of deranged splicers. Not content with waiting until they're dead? Pick them up alive with the second upgrade and sling them into their buddies to teach them a lesson, or just use them as human shields. There's so much to do with Telekinesis, and you can even combine it with the other upgraded trap plasmids by throwing the splicer into the setup devastation. It may be the most fun plasmid to play around with because there are just so many things that you can do with it. In fact, I really don't even have a negative thing to say about it. I just don't happen to enjoy it as much as I enjoy the other two on this list. If you play this game for a long enough period of time, then chances are you're going to toy around with Telekinesis, if not just to pick up otherwise inaccessible items. So, for those reasons, this iconic plasmid earns the 3rd spot on this list. If Telekinesis is on the list of the most iconic plasmids in BioShock, Electrobolt has to be at the top. In both games, this is the first power that you'll get, and by virtue of that, it's probably the one that you're going to be using the most. Great for enemies, and even better for doors. There are a couple of plasmids that have dual application in terms of being useful for environmental hazards, and also useful in combat, and Electrobolt may be chief among them. Any player worth their salt knows what this means, and you'll be seeing them quite a bit if you're scouring the city for every morsel of lore and ammo. But not only is this power a universal key, it's also perfect for a pool party. In a city full of dripping ceilings, this is the go-to when you're looking to take down any shin-bathing barbarians. If we're talking about the amount of times I've used any given plasmid, this is probably the one that's most consistently on hand. It's got these secondary uses that make it necessary for rotation, and it's also very helpful in combat to freeze enemies in place and pick up a headshot. All that, not even to mention the chain lightning effect that adds damage and increases stun times to splicers when you've upgraded it. Electrobolt is perhaps the most well-rounded plasmid in the game, arguably the most iconic, and certainly one of the coolest. So, for those reasons, it takes the 2nd spot on this list. It's only been since I started making my lore videos for BioShock 2 that I really discovered my love for Insect Swarm. I remember using this ability from time to time in the first game, but it never really made much of an impression on me. As such, when it wasn't flat out given to me in the 2nd game, I never searched it out to pick it up from the Gatherer's Garden, and thus opted for the more readily available options. However, when I was running back through this game, recording for all my lore stuff, I decided to give this plasmid a shot, and I have not looked back. For starters, my god, this thing has an amazing hand animation. It's disturbingly awesome to see killer bees flying out of Delta's honeycombed hands, even when the ability is idle. Then, in application, it's one of the few plasmids that you don't have to aim, which is so nice to distract enemies that you don't yet see. In that way, it's almost a precursor to Summon Eleanor, because it assists you in fights without you having to control it. Obviously, the bees are a bit less talkative though. Then, when you've upgraded it to its max, the bees will make nests inside the dead bodies of their prey, setting up traps that you don't even have to actively establish. It's a more passive plasmid that you can let off and then focus on headshots. Very effective when you've got a horde of bloodthirsty baddies breathing down your neck. Not to mention that it's just a very visually interesting ability that you probably wouldn't off the cuff think of in terms of superpowers that you'd be signing up for. So for all those reasons, Insect Swarm earns the #1 spot on my list.
Eleanor Lamb has turned on her own people. Stand and fight, or the Rapture family falls together.
Anyway, that's my list. What's yours? Feel free to let me know what you think in the comments down below. Almost every plasmid in this game could be a contender for someone's favorite, depending on their playstyle and personal proclivities, but for me, these are mine. I also like Incinerate and Cyclone Trap, but just not enough to beat out the other contenders. But thank you all for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in the next one.